Well, hello everybody. This is my first time doing something like this, so I hope you will bear with me as I demonstrate nervousness and not knowing what I'm doing. So um, it's great to see you all. Of course, I can't, but it's wonderful that you're all here. So let's begin. We'll begin by doing a sort of a short meditation and a setting of motivation. So please make yourselves comfortable wherever you are. And I want you to first of all acknowledge that you are not your body and you're not your mind and you're not the collection of them, because you have a body and a mind. And the owner and the owned can't be exactly the same thing. Just like a farmer and a farm can't be the same thing. So you're not your body, you're not your mind, and you're not the collection of them. Then you're not something separate and independent of them either. So if we rule out those two ideas of being separate and the same, how do we exist? So here we need to acknowledge that we do exist, and we exist in mere name. So each of us exists in mere name. And each of us are undergoing different types of difficulties, and we wish to be free of them. And these difficulties and the freedom that we wish to be free from also exist in mere name. So to be free from mere suffering and achieve mere freedom, we can rely upon those who have done that, meaning the bodhisattvas, the enlightened beings, and all the Buddhas. So I want you to think that all the Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and enlightened beings are with you, surrounding you, present to you. And I want you to take refuge in them. So do this in whichever way feels most comfortable to you and the way that you know easiest. And then I would like you to cultivate the mind of enlightenment. So think here that you're not taking refuge in the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to free yourself from suffering alone, but you wish to do this for the benefit of all beings. So we might say together, as long as space abides, and as long as sentient beings abide, may we too abide to free all living beings from their sufferings. Then to enhance and stabilize that wish, we need to think about the four boundless thoughts, or the four immeasurable thoughts. So here we can think that may all living beings abide in equanimity, free from aversion and free from attachment. May all living beings have happiness and its causes. And may all living beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And may all living beings never be separated from the higher rebirths and the bliss of liberation and the bliss of enlightenment. And may we ourselves bring this about. So the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas present, If you do have prayer books with you, or you can remember some of these prayers, we'll recite the 7-limb prayer now. So thinking that reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence, and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. And we dedicate all of our merits, and those of all others, to that great enlightenment. And so finally, we'll make an offering to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on behalf of ourselves and all living beings. And this is it's called the mandala. And remember here, the essence of it is to just let go. Let go of clinging to oneself as being ordinary, clinging to the body and mind as being oneself, and clinging to the idea that you might be separate from them. They think this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. We imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. And may all living beings enjoy this pure land. So now think that the Buddhas accept our offering and they smile at us in delight. And emanations of all the enlightened beings leave from their heart center and enter into us. And you think that our body, speech, and mind have been blessed by the enlightened beings. And so that we're able to participate in this teaching with a sense of joy and a sense of yearning to understand it and make it part of our lives. Okay, so thank you everyone, and we'll now sort of begin the major part of the course. So thank you once again. So welcome once again everyone. So we're doing this course called How to Develop Bodhicitta, and this is the 10th module in a series of 14 in a course called Discovering Buddhism. And our course topics today are impartiality, meaning equanimity and compassion, developing bodhicitta, meaning the mind of enlightenment, and the perfections and the vow to become enlightened. And so we're going to cover these topics over the 8 weeks. But today we're going to have a look at a few other things. So today's outcomes, the outcome today basically is an overview of the topics. So I was going to present it quite sort of briefly, and then in the next 7 weeks go into each of the topics in more depth. So first I'm going to give a, excuse me, brief presentation of the practices that need to be done prior to developing the mind of enlightenment. Then we're going to have a look at compassion, and I've got to present compassion in 2 different ways here, but they both come from the great practitioner called Chandrakirti. Then we'll move on to look at bodhicitta itself. So I'll define it, and we'll look at some of the different types of bodhicitta, some of the approaches that can be made and the levels of it. Then we'll look at some of the benefits, and then finally the 2 techniques for developing the mind of enlightenment, the common technique and the uncommon method for doing so. Now these are some of the books that I've used to draw information from to present this class. Now on the top we have the steps of the path to enlightenment and a path to enlightenment. So they're probably, when you're looking at your screen, they'll be on the left. And beneath it is a book called Gradual Awakening. So these 3 books are presenting compassion and the mind context of teachings called the Lam Rim, meaning the teachings that present a graduated path to enlightenment. Now, staying on the top row, but the last two on the right are Bodhicitta and Meditations of a Tantric Abbot, and the book below them on the right called Achieving Bodhicitta. These books are dealing with bodhicitta specifically. The book down the bottom called Introduction to the Middle Way, and the book up the top, once again, Meditations of a Tantric Abbot, I've relied on these to present teachings on compassion in particular. And the book called Buddhism, the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron, Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions, is a fantastic readable book that sort of goes into quite a lot of depth about compassion and the mind of enlightenment. Now, the next two slides that we're going to look at shortly are going to focus on the foundation practices, practices that support the generation of the mind of enlightenment. And we'll begin with a quote by Lama Khapa. So you can see the quote in front of you. It says, "When you've meditated thus and feel not even a moment's wish for the good things of cyclic life, and when you begin to think both night and day of achieving freedom, you've found renunciation." Now, the Jetsun Lama, Tsong Khapa, is the founder of the Gelugpa school of Tibetan Buddhism. And this quote, of course, is coming from the three principal aspects of the path. And these three principal aspects are renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view. And what he's basically saying, especially when we begin, when you've meditated thus. So what he's sort of saying is that when you become familiar with the teachings of the lower and middle scope, sometimes called four thoughts that turn the mind towards the Dharma. When you become familiar with these, and you no longer wish for the good things of cyclic life. So the good things of cyclic life are the objects that we derive pleasure from through our senses. So the good things that we see, touch, smell, read, and you get a sense of pleasure from this. So he's sort of saying here, so when we no longer are attached to those and have begun to think constantly about being free from the up and down cycle that the happiness our senses provide us with, then we've found renunciation. And this renunciation is a wish for freedom from the cycle of uncontrolled suffering. We no longer wish to be out of control. And this is our sort of driving force. Now, to bring about that wish to be free, we, like I said, look at the meditations on the lower and middle scope, commonly called four thoughts that turn the mind towards the Dharma. And these four thoughts are leisure and opportunity, which inspire within us a sense of appreciation for the human life that we have, and the fact that we've found a teacher, we've found a path that suits us. And we really appreciate this. It has great value. The second thought that turns the mind towards the Dharma is called impermanence and death. And this inspires within us a sense of urgency, a wish to engage in our path as quickly as possible. The third thought that turns the mind towards the Dharma is called karmic causality. And this inspires with us a sense of agency, meaning it's up to us. And not only is it up to us, we can actually do it. Freedom is possible, but we need to make the effort. The last thought that turns the mind towards the Dharma is called a reflection or a contemplation upon the unsatisfactory nature of cyclic existence. So we meditate on that or become familiar with it. It's to bring about a conviction that our freedom is actually possible, and it brings about an inward turning. We turn away from the objects that have brought us hedonic happiness, turn away from the objects that bring us worldly pleasure. And we turn inwards and seek refuge. So these are sort of preliminary practices that we need to engage in before we can actually move to the higher stages of practice of great compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth. So suppose we had done this and we've actually brought about the type of renunciation. We need to actually extend the wish for freedom. So we've brought about a wish for our own freedom, which is of course dependent upon this deep and pure self-compassion. This comes about, of course, because we've recognized the difficult state we find ourselves in. It's got to be imbued with wisdom so we can actually know we can be free from it. So as we know, we ourselves can be free from suffering and its causes. We can also look at others and see that they too could be free from suffering and its causes. And as there's no actual difference between ourselves and others, we can extend our compassion to every living being. By doing so, we sort of set up a basis for the mind of enlightenment and attaining Buddhahood. In relationship to that, we have another quote by the great Arya Shantideva, who says, "The fruit of enlightenment, solely for others' welfare, grows from the sprout of the mind of enlightenment, which has a root of firm compassion. This is what conquerors' children cultivate." So, dependent upon the four thoughts, turn the mind towards the Dharma. We develop compassion, and compassion is the basis for the mind of enlightenment. From the mind of enlightenment, we bring about the fruit called enlightenment. And the fruit of enlightenment is actually having or attaining the Rupakaya, meaning the body of a Buddha. So this brings us to the end of our presentation on the preliminary practices. And we're now going to have a look at this root of firm compassion. And we'll begin by looking first of all at compassion itself. So compassion here is defined as a virtuous mind that wishes others to be free from suffering. And this compassion is what's called ordinary compassion. Compassion may be defined quite differently in our culture, but here it's this one: a virtuous mind that wishes others to be free from suffering. So you can see here that it's a wish or an aspiration that we need to develop and cultivate. It's called ordinary compassion, not just for us, but also for those who are called hearers and solitary realizers. So we have a number of different vehicles within Buddhism, and these are two of the vehicles: the hearers, the vehicle of the hearers, the vehicle of the solitary realizers, and the bodhisattva vehicle. And this type of compassion is common to sort of all beings. What I'm sort of getting at here is that the compassion understood by the Mahayana practitioner is slightly different. and we'll come to that shortly. But now I want to have a look at compassion as it's referred to in the Mahayana vehicle, or the Sanskrit tradition. And in that vehicle, we're wishing to protect others from suffering and to remove suffering from other beings. Now, of course, we can't just reach into people's skulls and pull out suffering and throw it away. That's impossible to do, of course. So the means of protecting others is to develop ourselves until we become perfect ourselves, until we become Buddhas, and show others how to engage in that process of removal. So compassion in the beginning, middle, and end relates to three things. The first being the start of practice. So here is basically a wish to relieve others from the three types of suffering: the suffering of dukkha, or the suffering of change, and the suffering of all pervasive conditioning. So really strong feeling from our side to bring about this ending of suffering. Now in the middle, we have to sort of continue our practice of this. We actually have to sort of help others in relieving their suffering. And how we do this is by we ourselves engaging in the 6 perfections and the 4 means of gathering disciples. And finally, at the end, we sort of accomplish the practice. So here we're fully enlightened, we are Buddhas, and our ability to hold others with compassion is spontaneous and continuous and effortless. So you can sort of see how compassion is engaged in different parts of the path. Now this is the first presentation of Chandrakirti, and for our sakes probably the most important one, because there are some questions in the DV module, and they do ask a question about compassion at the beginning, middle, and end. But there is another presentation also that I wish to talk to you about, and this is the one coming up. So here we have a picture of a well and a bucket within that well with water in it, and it's being wound up to the top. And this is the second presentation of Chandrakirti. So it is called a compassion maintained by a mind realizing how all sentient beings wander in samsara without any type of control. In fact, in the text, Chandrakirti says, homage to that compassion for migrators who are powerless like a bucket traveling in a well, through initially adhering to a self, an I, and then generating attachment for things. This is mine. So the way to remember something is that every sentient being lacks control. So when we observe mere living beings, we should acknowledge that every sentient being lacks control. Now, when this is taught in the monasteries, apparently the teachers make the sounds of a bucket thrown into a well and descending to the bottom. So they make those like and crush and bang and sort of things like this. Not like I'm saying it in English, but they would, like they would bang things and make noises. So it actually seemed like there was a bucket being thrown into a well. And the idea behind this was to get people to reflect on the suffering of sentient beings who lack control and to have compassion for them. So it's actually a meditative device. So that means, I guess, that this idea of a bucket descending into a well to pull up water has a lot of symbolic value. So let's have a look at that. So when we look at a well, we have the top of the well and the bottom of the well. And so here, the top of the well represents the three higher realms of humans, the anti-gods and the gods. And the bottom of the well, representing the animal realms, the hungry ghost realms, and the realms of the hell beings. And when the bucket is thrown into the well, it's sort of showing it's very easy to fall from the higher realms to the lower realms. And as the bucket goes in, it doesn't often just go straight down the middle, it can crash against the sides. And so there's a lot of suffering in the between state from the top to the bottom. We also see the bucket is very quick to descend into greater suffering. Of course, once the bucket has reached the bottom and scoops up the water, and you have to bring it up to the top. So they often use a thing called a windlass, where you sort of wind it up. So it's very hard to raise a bucket filled with water. It takes quite a lot of effort. And this is representing the mind, an untamed mind. It takes a lot of effort to bring an untamed mind under control. And so this is the turning of the windlass. And being very difficult to rise is because the mind is sort of battered around by the afflictions. So I think all of us know this in our own experience. It's very hard to bring an untamed mind under your control. In fact, this saying here, every sentient being lacks control, is the meaning we should take away from our understanding of the first noble truth of suffering. In fact, I remember Khensa Rinpoche, Geshe-Tashi Sering, asking us in class one day, what is the meaning of the first noble truth? And none of us could answer it. And he sort of went, sentient beings lack control. He said this quite firmly. And I think he wanted us to walk away with that in mind, to always remember this. So here we're sort of saying, Chandrakirti is saying, look, have compassion for sentient beings who lack control. Now the second is compassion maintained by a mind, realizing living beings to be impermanent. So this slide and the next one are really talking about sentient beings qualified by momentariness and non-inherent existence. In fact, in the verses, Chandrakirti says, homage to that compassion for migrators, seen as evanescent and empty of inherent existence, like a moon in rippling water. But every sentient being is subject to change. And once again, we're all going through great changes at the moment, aren't we? So some of us are well, but you could be quite sick in a few days' time. You just don't know. So our bodies change without, we don't have any control over that. The mind is changing all the time. We lack control over that. Happiness is subject to change. Suffering itself is subject to change. And then we have this next one called compassion, observing the unobservable, which means compassion maintained by a mind realizing that living beings are empty of inherent existence. So Chandrakirti says, homage to compassion, viewing migrators as empty of inherent existence, though they appear to exist inherently, like the reflection of the moon in water. So we appear to ourselves to exist inherently, and the phenomena around us appear to exist inherently. When in fact we don't exist inherently, and neither do phenomena. Now, if we as persons were to exist inherently, what would that mean? Basically, it would mean that we would be the same as the collection of our body and mind. There'd be no difference whatsoever between our body and mind and ourselves. But that is not observable. In fact, we're empty of that type of existence. And so this is what this is referring to. Compassion observantly unobservable. Every sentient being is empty of inherent existence. Every sentient being merely exists in mere name. Unfortunately, we might hear that or read about it and even agree with it. However, it's very, very difficult to just take that idea and really make it ours. So basically, we sort of grasp at ourselves to inherently exist. We grasp at the phenomena around us to inherently exist, when in fact they don't. Now, this grasping actually is a major source for suffering. So we can see that although inherent existence is not observable, people nevertheless grasp at it to be true. So we have compassion for those sentient beings. So I'll just pause here, and if you have any sort of questions about this, perhaps you could just dash a few lines off to Miffy. And whether you do or not, there is some very good commentary about these three: compassion observing the unobservable, compassion observing phenomena, and compassion observing mere sentient beings. And this is in that in a book called Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism. It was that book on top when I first showed you the books, the red one on the very right-hand side. But if you have any questions, please, I'll just take a couple and then we'll move on.
No one's written anything yet, though there may be 1,000 very fast fingers writing as we speak. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, let's just take a couple of minutes and then I'll do the next bit.
So there is a leading question from Jen Compton. If I'm not my body and or mind, then what am I?
So you're not those two, and you're not something separate and independent. So you exist in mere name. The I is a mere name given to the collection of the body and mind. That's what you are, mere name.
And then Ian's asking, is it the same if a non-virtuous mind wishes others to be free from suffering? So do you need to be virtuous to be compassionate?
Compassion is regarded as a virtuous state of mind.
Would there be anything where it couldn't be non-virtuous, could it?
No, no. Compassion is not a non-virtuous state of mind, it's the opposite. So the person that had thought of compassion, at that time you would say they were virtuous, it was a virtuous state of mind that the person possessed. Okay, should we go on?
Yeah, go on. I'll
Okay.
interrupt you if any more questions come.
Okay, so we'll put that aside now we'll start looking at great compassion, which is the precursor, one of the precursors to the mind of enlightenment. So we'll look at how that's defined first of all. So great compassion is defined as a virtuous mind that wishes to protect all living beings from their suffering. So you can see here that slight difference, isn't there? Not just a wish that all beings be free from suffering, but a wish to protect them from suffering. Now, I'm just wondering if we should do a brief meditation or not. Well, let's do a brief meditation. So just wherever you are, just get comfortable. You don't need to close your eyes, but if you want to, you can. But just settle your body and mind in this sort of natural state. Then imagine that your own pristine awareness, which transcends all distortions and afflictions of the mind, to be an orb of radiant light in the center of your chest, so sort of between your breasts, around about your heart level. It's about a ½ inch in diameter. It's in the center of your chest. And this pristine awareness is the source of all goodness and joy. And on your out breath, I want you to say to yourself, may I find happiness and its causes. And on that exhalation of breath, have that light expand and start filling all the DNA that's within your body. Think of the light permeating every cell of your body and every facet of your mind. May I find happiness and its causes. On the exhalation, the light fills every cell of your body and every aspect of mind. May I be well, may I be truly happy. And now just gently bring your awareness back to your screen. But think that the residue of this wish still permeates the body and mind. And so by extending loving kindness to yourself, this is an act of what we call self-compassion, being kind to oneself. So here you wish to protect yourself from suffering. Of course, you can easily extend this to others as well, but here I just want you to sort of get a brief taste of it for yourself. Now, this great compassion is one of the precursors and causes for the mind of enlightenment. And the mind of enlightenment in Sanskrit is called bodhicitta. So let's have a look at that and its definition. So bodhicitta
Just a sec, Eddie. You've just frozen for a second. Can you just repeat that again?
Okay, so bodhicitta is defined as for the sake of others, wishing to attain complete, perfect enlightenment. And like I said, it's bodhicitta itself is the means for entering the Mahayana path. It is one of the defining characteristics of the Mahayana. It makes us a Mahayana Buddhist. And this is how it's defined in brief. Of course, it has a much longer definition, but this is one we can all remember. Actually, I'll just read out the long one, but I won't sort of break it down to each of the steps. It says, bodhicitta is a special mental main mind, which is the entryway to the Mahayana path and is concomitant with its assistant aspiration that focuses on complete enlightenment for the benefit of others. In brief, it's just like this: for the sake of others, wishing to attain complete and perfect enlightenment. So when it says, like I said before, it's one of the principal states of awareness. It's a mental consciousness. And like I said, it's the entryway to the Mahayana. So we'll just leave it like this for the moment. Like I said, it's just an overview, but we'll go into this in more depth in later classes. Now, just by having this wish, does this mean that our bodhicitta is authentic? And I hope to answer that shortly. So the question here is, when is it authentic? Well, when through the force of strong familiarity with the meditations of equalizing, exchanging self for others, or the 6 causes in one effect, or the combination of them. So when that becomes really strong, so that it arises naturally without actually having to go through that meditation, without effort, and it's constant, then we can say we have the uncontrived mind of enlightenment. So this wish to become enlightened, to free others from their suffering, when that's always present, not every moment, but it's on the mind stream. So when this, let me say, we are, in other words, we are committed to attaining enlightenment for the sake of others. Now, bodhicitta can be talked about in a number of different ways. So let's have a look at some of these ways. But first, we'll look at a quote by Arya Shantideva, the author of The Bodhisattva's Way of Life, who describes 2 of these ways. So first he says, the bodhicitta, in brief, should be understood to be of 2 types: the mind that wishes for enlightenment and the mind that ventures to attain it. So how can we understand the difference? Well, as is understood by the distinction between wishing to go and actually going. So the wise understand, and in turn, the distinction between these 2. So we have wishing bodhicitta and venturing bodhicitta. So most of us will be more familiar with the term called engaging bodhicitta, but venturing and engaging refer to the same type of mind. So let's have a look at these 2 entities. Wishing bodhicitta. Now this is of 2 types. What is the mere wish? That's where we just have this, the wish, like, you know, I'd like to get enlightened to bring about the welfare of sentient beings. We often say this is a wish that there's often in the prayers that we make. And perhaps we might even do different activities around the home and wish that by engaging in these activities, we become enlightened for the benefit of others. But there's another type of wish called the committed wish. And the difference is like this: from this day forward, I'll never forsake this aspiration. I'll never ever let go of this wish. So they're both wishing bodhicitta, but there's a slight difference between them. And when we look at venturing bodhicitta or the engaging bodhicitta, here we've got this picture of, which I hope illustrates the previous slide, where we want to go somewhere, and we might even have the map. It's like sort of wanting to go perhaps to India or overseas, and we read about it. We might even look at YouTube slides, YouTube films and so forth. That's like the wishing bodhicitta. No, we haven't actually gone yet. Engaging bodhicitta is when you've like gone. You've got your map, you know what to do, and you are doing it. So engaging bodhicitta is really sort of combined with what they call the perfections. In fact, I've been to different teachings by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and at one time he, sort of asked, should I just give the wishing bodhicitta or the vow for engaging in bodhicitta? So there is some difference there. But these are the most common types of entity. Of course, sometimes people talk about bodhicitta ultimate and conventional, and there's other ways of presenting it too. But here are the main ones, and these are the ones we'll be mainly focused on in our classes. So Arya Shantideva, once again, the person who wrote the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, in his book, there's this lovely verse that says, as long as space abides, as long as sentient beings abide, may I too abide, to dispel the suffering of all living beings. So His Holiness will often quote this. We quote it ourselves when we dedicate prayers and so forth, dedicate practices. The first three lines here really are referring to wishing bodhicitta, and the last line to the engagement of bodhicitta, that we will actually dispel the suffering of all living beings. We're engaged in that practice. Now, so I'll bring to your attention now, just as a sort of aside, some of the other ways that we can think about bodhicitta. So you might have read where they present bodhicitta as being like a shepherd, a pilot, and a king. They're sort of thinking about the ways of this attainment of bodhicitta. So when we talk about bodhicitta, shepherd-like bodhicitta, it means you want to bring others to enlightenment, but you follow along, last of all, like a shepherd driving sheep into a pen. Let others become enlightened before me. The other is called attaining the mind of enlightenment to be like a pilot. And this is a pilot on like a raft, or you could even use them in a plane, where you and others become enlightened at the same time. And last is king-like bodhicitta, where you sort of think, I'm going to lead enlightened being. I'm going to lead all beings to enlightenment. So these are all, what do you say, sort of ways of thinking. Because the actual accomplishment of bodhicitta and enlightenment is only the last one, the king-like. I will lead them to enlightenment. Nevertheless, there are these ways of thinking about it. And finally, we can talk about bodhicitta in terms of the 5 Mahayana paths. So we have bodhicitta on the paths of accumulation. So this is called the mind generation of inspiration or appreciation. So when we actually have the mind of enlightenment, we enter the path of accumulation. as we keep developing over that paths of accumulation and preparation, we enter the path of seeing, we enter the grounds of the Mahayana, and then you can work up to the 7th ground, and there it's called, all the way through that, from the 1st ground to the 7th, it's just called a bodhicitta of the pure, exceptional resolve. Then there are and those, the 1st ground to the, including the 7th ground, are called the ordinary grounds, whereas the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds are called the extraordinary grounds. And here it's called the mature mind generation, or fully ripened bodhicitta. And finally, we have bodhicitta at the time of Buddhahood, and it's called the abandonment of every obstruction. And this sort of presentation of the paths is also described in a text by Maitreya. So here we have the slide describing bodhicitta to be like the earth, like the gold, like a moon. And that's describing bodhicitta on the path of accumulation. When it's on the path of preparation, it's described as fire. On the 1st ground, it's like a treasure. And all the way the other grounds, of course, up to the wish-fulfilling gem, it becomes like the 8th ground, and so forth. Finally, we've got these ones called the lute, the river, and the cloud, bodhicitta being like that. So that's the ground of Buddha. So you can see there are many different presentations of the mind of enlightenment, depending on where it's on the, before you even enter a path, on a path, what it's like on the grounds, and finally, what it's like in the state of Buddhahood. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits of having the mind of enlightenment. So here the Buddha has said, if whatever merit there is in the spirit of enlightenment, if whatever merit there is in the spirit of enlightenment had form, it will fill the entire vault of the sky and then exceed it. So a couple of interesting things here. First of all, I think there's the word spirit. So spirit just refers to the mind. I think in German, the word for mind is like Geist, and mind, spirit, and Geist are referring to the very same thing. And if this merit, if the power of this mind were to have form, were to have physical shape in any way, if it could be perceived by the eyes, or smelt by the nose, or heard in sound, it would fill, like I said, the entire vault of the sky. It would fill all of space. And then it would, if space could be exceeded, it would go further than that. So what we can take from this is, like, this is a really marvelous type of mind to have. In fact, in all my readings of different philosophies, I've never come across anything like it. Now, there are many different ways, there are many presentations talking about the benefits of them. And a lot of the benefits, of course, you can find in the 1st chapter of the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva, and I think Khyentse Rinpoche, Geshe Tashi Tsering is teaching on that topic at the moment. And so, but what I've done here is just put up some of the benefits that I think that can relate to us directly within this life, so that we can sort of be encouraged to try and engage with this mind, cultivate it and develop it. So the first thing it does is it reduces selfishness. If you think a little bit about this, I think this will be sort of obvious to you, because the focus of this mind is off oneself and on others. It's really looking at the suffering that others go through, knowledge of the happiness that they wish to have, and sort of being always willing to help another be free of that suffering and to deliver them into different states of happiness. So because our object of awareness is not ourselves, selfishness is reduced significantly. And with selfishness being reduced, of course, there is less worry. Because one person we can always be assured of worrying about is ourselves. You know? So when the object of the mind is another person who's going through suffering, there's less worry for us. And from that, of course, we become much more content and happier. So this is, of course, what can I say, testable. We can test ourselves by finding ourselves in situations where we find that we are very worried about ourselves, and then bring other people into the scope of our awareness. Now, if you think that there are enlightened beings surrounding you, your awareness will be off yourself and on them, and believe me, you'll feel a lot better. If you have children or loved ones and you're going through difficulties and you just think about yourself, it's just terrible. But when you focus on the other, the terrors are less, and we become really sort of motivated to sort of make their lives easier. Now, a person who's developed this mind will actually naturally become more joyful. It's like I was saying before, if you think about it, this is a very rare type of attitude. I've only come across it within Buddhist texts. So everything that you would be doing is a means to bring about your own enlightenment. And I would suggest that's a joyful activity. And being like that, just like this picture here of Lama's open Rinpoche, that joy attracts others. And life does become truly meaningful. When everything that you're doing, thinking, trying to speak of, is leading you ever closer to enlightenment. In fact, I can't think of anything, any mindset that's more meaningful than the mind of enlightenment. So these are, like I said, there are many different benefits. I'll just put these ones up here, and particularly on the slide, so that you could sort of get to, I could quite resonate with you. Now, I'll just mention now some of the ones that are more tied into the Mahayana path in Buddhism, for instance. So, first of it's called that it's the origin of all the good of self and others. The origin of all the good of self and others. This mind is also compared to a medicine that alleviates all troubles. That's the second benefit. And third is it's the great path traveled by all knowledgeable persons. In fact, it's the only path that can lead to Buddhahood. Without this mind, there's no Buddhahood. And this mind is also, one of its great benefits is that it's called nourishment for all who see, hear, remember, or encounter it. And finally, the fifth benefit is that it's a very great skillful means which you can engage in to bring about your own welfare and others' welfare. Now, you bring about your own welfare indirectly by focusing on others' welfare. And like I was saying, if you wish to know more of the benefits, which actually, I think once you've taken the Bodhisattva vow, you're required to become familiar with the benefits of bodhicitta 6 times a day. So 3 times in the morning, 3 times at night. Try to go to the texts or memorize some of the benefits of this mind. And in that way, encourage yourself on your own path.
Eddie, can you just repeat what number 2 was that you just said?
Yes. Number 2 is called the medicine that alleviates all troubles.
And also, can you clarify, so it's to think not just of bodhicitta 6 times a day, but to think of the benefits of bodhicitta 6 times a day.
Yes, that's right. It's not, yeah, that's right. It's not just to say, wish to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. You actually sort of go through and say, what are the benefits of that? You know, one of them, of course, is really obvious one, the last one. Life becomes truly meaningful. But you could also say, if I develop this, I'll actually enter the Mahayana path and be a Mahayanist. Another could be, without the development of this mind is necessary to become a Buddha. I must develop this mind. You know, so try and find, if you wanted to go through the text, just pick 1 or 2 out at a time and and think about them. And sort of like I said, you can test them sometimes. Like I said, there is less worry. If your mind is focused on the other person and their troubles, it's not on your own troubles. In fact, I remember a story that the Dalai Lama told when he, a number of years ago, had some sort of problem with his stomach. And they took him down from Dharamsala. They had to get him to a hospital. And he was in a car, like curled up on the back seat in agony. It was really painful stomach. And he looked out the window and he could see the beggars and the people living on the side of the roads in their hovels. And he just had this natural compassion for them. And just by focusing on them and being concerned about their welfare, the pain within his stomach diminished. You know, and this is not an unusual thing. You can find this happening to yourself. Oftentimes, people can be suffering a great deal, but through that suffering, when they're not focused on it, they can help somebody else. You know, like you've probably heard of stories of people lifting cars off people. Somebody, cars run over them. And instead of just sitting there looking at them and being really freaked out yourself because there's, you know, like nothing you can do and you're just getting overwhelmed by the suffering of seeing somebody there. There's been stories of people just getting down and just seem to have superhuman strength, just lifting that car up and others pulling the people away. And I think, you know, our joy attracts others. Also, like I said, when a person is, you know, like for instance, Lama's Lopa Rinpoche, when we went to see him at the airport, wow, you could see, you know, we're a long line of people standing there with our white cards ready to offer them. But his concern for each one of us, like stopping beside each one of us, like holding our hands, asking what our names were, asking something about us, and then sort of like patting us on our cheek. You know, and then taking that scarf and wrapping it around our neck. You know, the whole emphasis on the other being more important than myself. And by doing that, we bring ourselves closer and closer to enlightenment. At the very same time, decrease the suffering we presently experience. So one more about the benefits. So Arya Shantideva said, "It is the supreme gold-making elixir, for it transforms the unclean body we have taken into a priceless jewel of a Buddha form. Therefore, firmly seize this awakening mind." So there's a couple of things going on in this verse. One of them is the analogy about the gold-making elixir. So some of you might be familiar of those stories where people try to turn lead into gold. So you have to do something, and something ordinary becomes something really valuable. And here he's saying, so we've got this unclean body, the body taken under the craving and grasping, so that we have these aggregates that produce suffering. So that's how we find ourselves at present. Yet with this mind, we can transform, we can end up having a different type of body. We can end up having the body of a Buddha. So on the basis of this body, we end up having the body of a fully enlightened being, just by developing this mind of enlightenment. He says, so don't, so seize it, and don't let it go. So the mind of enlightenment is the most merit-producing mind. And with it, it helps us achieve the form body of a Buddha. So I was thinking, so just as a fertilized egg was required for us to have this body, bodhicitta is required to achieve the form body of a Buddha. So once again, I'll just open it up for any questions. If anybody would like to ask anything, please type away or raise your hand and ask Miffy.
I can still see everybody's there, Eddie. It's not speaking into the void. But it's a bit like me, just going, very interesting. Has anyone got any questions? Just write in the chat, or just say yes in the chat and I can unmute you.
So should I move on to the next slide, Miffy?
Ingrid's just still listening. So yeah, I think move on, and you can just write a question anytime, folks.
Okay, that's right. So now we're going to have to look at, so we can see this mind of enlightenment is a wonderful mind to have, but how do we get to actually possess it? I mean, it's a mental consciousness, so it requires development. So let's have a look at that next. So here we have what's called the methods for development, and we have two types of methods called the common and uncommon methods for developing the mind of enlightenment. And within the common methods, we have two. First, there is Atisha's 7 cause and effect personal instruction. So I assume many of you would be familiar with this type of training the mind. So I think with this one, we had to have the preliminary practice of equanimity. Then it was recognizing all sentient beings as your mother, recollecting their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, affectionate love, great compassion, the sort of responsible altruistic attitude, and finally bodhicitta. So that's one method. And the other method, of course, is Shantideva's equalizing and exchanging oneself for others. In that method, you begin by equalizing yourself with others, then to recognize the faults of self-cherishing and the benefits of cherishing others, then to make the exchange, and then engage in the giving and taking meditation.
Eddie, just before you go on, Dan wanted to know, could you just explain a little bit more about the Supreme Gold Making Elixir?
So ask Dan what part of it is not clear to him.
Okay, so let me find Dan and I will see if I can. Where are we? Okay. Dan, is there what's the bit that wasn't clear? Did you want to say anything, or did you want to type it in? You can say something if you like. Maybe Dan's just thirsty. Go for it, Dan.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry. Hi. Sorry, just I wanted to know about the Supreme Court making elixir. What does that mean?
Okay. Okay. So
thank you.
What's this thing called? So a long time ago, Dan, in the European countries in the medieval ages, and there was this idea that you could turn base metals into something really precious. But you had to sort of what do they call them? They weren't magicians, but they were
the alchemists.
Alchemists.
So before the chemists was the alchemists.
That's right. So the alchemists. So an alchemist would try to turn something like a base metal, like iron, for instance, into something very precious. Iron was very common, and they want to turn it into something uncommon and very valuable. And so that was the idea, right? And so this elixir, you have to do something. The elixir was the means to turn something very common, like lead or iron, into something very precious like gold. So that's the analogy. Then we come to us and we go, okay, so how am I going to become a Buddha? How am I going to become fully enlightened when I'm just an ordinary person? So we need an elixir, something to make that change. That change is the mind of enlightenment. That will change us from being ordinary beings with an ordinary body, subject to suffering, to become an extraordinary being, a being with a body of a Buddha that is not subject to suffering and is able to bring about the welfare of others easily. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that helping? Thank you very much.
Okay. So now we've still got these two methods here for the development of the mind of enlightenment. So, like I said, it teaches 7 cause and effect personal instruction, and Shantideva's equalizing and exchanging. Now, what we need to do is to take each of these methods and study each of them. So often, when we go to teachings by Khyentse Rinpoche or any other great Dharma teacher, when we go to learn about the mind of enlightenment, they'll introduce us to one of these methods. So in other words, we learn about the method. So we learn about Atisha's method, for instance, and then we learn about Shantideva's method. The purpose for doing this is to accurately lay down the foundations and lines of reasoning. But when it comes to the actual practice of the mind of enlightenment, to actually develop it and then cultivate it, we go to the uncommon method. And this is Lama Tsongkhapa's 11-point method, where they integrate both together. Now, this is said to be a much more powerful method than to do either of the others individually. So one of the authors who's written about this, a man called Miles Neal, said this, which I'll just read to you. Practicing this method, meaning the uncommon method, practicing this uncommon method activates and synchronizes reason through critical analysis and the heart through effective response in an integrative and neurologically coherent manner. So in the next 7 weeks, we're going to look at each of these. We're going to spend like one whole teaching on Atisha's method, one whole teaching on Shantideva's, and then another one on Lama Tsong Khapa's 11-point method. So I hope that's clear to you, everyone listening. You know, like read, study. You can try it out, each of these two. But when it actually, it's much more effective and more powerful to integrate the two, and you use Lama Tsong Khapa's 11-point method. So in brief, we've looked at compassion and 3 of its types. So remember, there was compassion in the beginning, middle, and end. And there was compassion for mere sentient beings, compassion extended out towards phenomena, and compassion, the non-observable inherent existence.
Eddie, can you just, Eddie, before you go on with the compassion for the mere sentient beings, can you tell me why it's not just for sentient beings? Okay,
so I've seen in texts that sometimes they've put it not just sentient beings, but all sentient beings. And then I've come across it being mere sentient beings. So I really like the mere. Because if you ask, like, what is a sentient being? What can happen here is that you grab the sentient being to be inherently existent, to be the body, or the mind, or the combination of them. But sentient beings don't actually exist like that. They don't conventionally exist like that. We exist in mere name. So that's the actual sentient being. So it's called mere, because if we look for a sentient being within the body and mind, we don't find one. If we look for the sentient being that is the body, we won't find one. And if we look for a sentient being that is the mind, we don't find one. Yet sentient beings exist. So how? You know, in mere name. So it's called, you know, compassion extended towards mere sentient beings.
And is that also then that if you don't say mere sentient being and you go for all sentient beings, then you're grasping onto them being forever suffering and in misery and there's no way out? That's
well, you're actually misapprehending your object. You know, so there aren't any. So like I said, on the last one, it said compassion extended to the unobservable. So sentient beings, it's not observed that sentient beings exist inherently. Like, how do they exist? You know, and that's like the ultimate nature of it. You know, no sentient being has inherent existence. That's the ultimate nature of a sentient being. But then if you go to the other one, it's like, so how do they exist? They're conventionally, in mere name. So we're actually dealing with a sentient being that does exist, and not a sentient being that doesn't exist. And this is sort of like, you know, why I tried to start the classes off immediately by talking about ourselves existing in mere name, not being the body, not being the mind, not being the combination of them, not being something independent of them. because we need to, what would you say, combine or conjoin our wisdom with compassion. And if we just say sentient beings, the wisdom part's left out. Because like I said, we see sentient beings to inherently exist, to truly exist, when in fact they don't. So that's how I see this term mere being very, very useful. Because like I said, when you do analyze the person and ask yourself, what is a person? You ask, is the person the body? No. Is the person the mind? No. Is it both together? No, no. Is it something independent of these two, separate from them? Well, no. It's very hard, isn't it, to say, well, what's a sentient being? Who's the sentient being? Just like Jennifer asked at the beginning. And you say, well, the sentient being that exists in mere name, that sentient being exists, where the other two don't exist. So I hope that's sort of useful for people to hear. Like I said, we've got to sort of conjoin or combine compassion for sentient beings with a wisdom that realizes these sentient beings exist in mere name and lack inherent existence.
And so Pila asks, so is the person just an abstraction or a concept?
Yeah, basically, yes, a concept. The person is a concept called person. We have the concept, the idea, person, and we label it onto, we put it onto the basis of a body and mind. So it's an idea called person, labeled onto something else, a body and a mind, and now we have a person. It's not just concept independent of a body and mind. The body and mind, or the basis for the person, is required.
And so Jen asks, so is it also like for everything, trees and rivers and building, yes, they're all labels?
Everything is merely labeled.
So then does that mean no subject and object?
Subject and object exist merely labeled. They exist at the conventional level as names. So it's not that there is no subject-object, there is no inherent subject-object. Subject and object exist conventionally in mere name. It's quite a fine line to tread, isn't it?
So dependently, then, they exist
Dependently, that's right. The object exists, in this case, dependent upon the name.
So I've got to say at this moment, Eddie, mind blown.
Well, I really like this term, merely, in mere name, because like I said, once you search for the person and discover that they're not a physical entity like the body, they're nothing physical, and they're not a mental state, they're not, an object of awareness, they're not clarity and knowing, because that's the definition of a mind, right? So they're not that. So then it's like, just like Jennifer said, so what other person is there? Yeah, well, the one that exists in mere name. We've got these two things called a body and mind. We put them together and you drop on top of that a name that describes them, person or I. And that's how the person exists. So this is really terrific to get your head around. And once you get it for yourself, you can, like Jennifer was saying, you can extend it out to trees, cars. And all you need to do is to look within the parts of the car or the tree for the thing you're looking for. Of course, you don't find it. You know, it seems to not be there at all. It's not there. It's not truly there. But yet it exists. So then he comes to God. It's just a name. I'll give it to it. So suffering exists like that too. Everything does. So it really sort of loosens up the grasping at things to be true or real. And you know, I'm trying to bring this into these classes really early in the piece, like when we take refuge, and I'll do it over and over, because we have to integrate our understanding of the conventionalities, you know, the people who suffer. We've got to understand that the people don't truly exist, the suffering doesn't truly exist. It does exist, of course, dependently and in mere name. You know? So it's quite a fine line to draw, but we can draw it. So these are some of the other things we looked at. So if you looked at the slide right now on your screen, can anybody remember what the techniques are for the development of this mind without going backwards or looking at notes or anything like that? There was the uncommon method and the common method, wasn't there? And within the common method, there were two techniques. Do you remember what those were? Then there are many benefits to being radically altruistic or to have the mind of enlightenment. Can you think of a couple? And there are different types of radical altruism, different types of bodhicitta. Can you think of a couple of them? And you remember the definition of bodhicitta. So many of you will have probably a PDF of all these slides, so much of the information is on it. You also have the material from the FPMT from Central Office. So in your own time, please look at that material. And here's some of the things you can have a look at. So perhaps you could just sort of scribble these down somewhere. Okay, so let's dedicate then. So due to the past, present, and future merits, which are like a dream and exist in mere name, which are created by myself, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and all sentient beings, who also exist like a dream and in mere name. May I and you attain enlightenment, which is like a dream and exists in mere name. And lead every sentient being to enlightenment, which is like a dream, but exists in mere name. By ourselves alone, which, not existing from the side of the body and mind, exists in mere name. So thank you very, very much for being here tonight and accompanying me on our exploration of the mind of enlightenment. So there's many of you that I know, and I just want to say hello again, and you can see Miffy's cut most of my hair off. So it's a little surprise. And for those who've been new to the class, welcome.